Hey, how's it going guys? Nate here, and welcome your faces back to some more Battlefield 1. And today I want to discuss whether or not this game is poised to suffer the same fate as Battlefront. Another very big, popular DICE EA game that initially showed so much promise and potential that only after the first couple of months ultimately faltered in player populations and is largely regarded as a flop among the community, despite it perhaps being a financial success. And I want to discuss why that happened to Battlefront, and why I don't exactly believe the same thing is going to be happening to Battlefield 1. I'm also going to address some criticisms being levied against the game regarding it being a bit of a clone against Battlefront, and why I don't exactly believe that's true either. So, without further ado, let's do further. In my opinion, the thing that most distinguishes Battlefield 1, and just all Battlefield games in general from Battlefront, is the kit and class system. Essentially, you could play no two kits the same way. You couldn't play Assault like you played Recon. You couldn't play Recon like you played Support or Engineer. You were forced to change your playstyle depending on the kit you chose, and I feel like this was a really great mechanic. And the way the game enforced this is each kit had a selection of weapons that you can choose from that kind of influence you to play in a certain direction, and it would also have some equipment options and some gadgets that would also kind of push you in that same direction to play however the kit was designed to do so. So if you wanted to go Recon, for instance, you'd have things like an extra scope or a Recon beacon to spawn on, as well as a sniper rifle selection that just encourage you to stay from a distance and kind of pick people off from long ranges. If you wanted to play Assault, you'd be encouraged to get in the middle of the gunfight, right in the action, with a weapon that kind of helped you out in close quarters to medium ranged combat, and also offer you some medical supplies along the way in case you got shot too much or whatever, because you'd be right in the middle of the action. And the game was really good at doing this, and you would be forced to play based on your kit. Your kit dictated the way you'd play the game. And of course there are exceptions to this, you know? There are outliers. Some people would play Assault and they'd still hang back. Some people would play Support with an LMG and act like they're sniping. And sometimes you can get away with that, but overall, generally, players were forced to play dictated on which kit they chose, and it forced everybody to act a little bit differently. Oftentimes it encouraged more communication than we'd see in most FPS games, and altogether it was a pretty unique mechanic in Battlefield that I've always felt has really made the game more interesting. Compare this with Battlefront, which didn't have that kit system. Instead, it had maybe a dozen and a half weapons that all, excluding sniper rifles, played relatively the same way. I recall one weapon fired very fast, similar to an LMG, but it played the same way as everything else. You weren't encouraged to change your playstyle depending on which weapon you chose. Now, there were some gadgets and some other things you attached to yourself, like a jetpack or an extra grenade and things like that, but altogether, everybody typically played the same way. It played like it was Call of Duty in space, and you might be arguing, well, wait a minute, Nate, what about vehicles? There were vehicles in Battlefront 2. Well, yes, that's true, but also, it was kind of random in how you got them. You know, you'd have to find the power-up somewhere in the map, you'd have to go up there, you'd have to hold both bumper sticks, and basically just cross your fingers and hope you didn't get shot. And then you'd be able to fly in a jet, or not a jet, I'm sorry, a spaceship, or you'd maybe be able to get an AT-AT, things like that. But there was never a way to guarantee yourself to get into a vehicle in the first place, so generally, most players just selected a weapon and began to rush with it, as I did, and played it like it was Call of Duty in space. Furthermore, with this lack of other playstyles, this lack of incentive to change the way you played the game, it got boring very, very quickly, because as I mentioned, there was only about a dozen and a half weapons to choose from, which resulted in maybe after the first 50 hours, you probably experienced everything there was about Battlefront. No attachments, no camos, nothing to really progress towards, and then this lack of varied gameplay styles only incentivized you to get bored with the game very, very quickly, as opposed to Battlefield, which had so many different ways to play the game. Of course, you can rank up your guns, you can get new attachments, new camos for it, and it just encouraged you to play in so many different ways and give it so much longevity and so much replay value that Battlefront could never really emulate. And what Battlefield 1 has done so well, in my opinion, is it's noticed this kit/class system and looked at the contrast between classes and has sharpened them. So now say you're using the Recon class and you're a sniper. Now you're even more useless at close ranges. However, you're that much more effective at longer distances, even more so than in Battlefield 4. If you're using the Assault class, don't even bother trying to go anywhere outside of short ranges, because you've got a limited mag size and terrible accuracy, and you're gonna fare just absolutely horribly up against people with LMGs and snipers. But when you're in close quarters, you also have a really high time to kill. So the lack of accuracy, the lack of mag size doesn't generally matter so long as you're within a good range, good enough to get a good 7 shots on somebody. So you'll just tear up anybody that's near you when you're in CQC. But other than that, Assault classes, don't use them anywhere else. And then there's a healthy balance achieved with a Support class that performs relatively okay in most ranges, however also is generally outperformed by snipers at long ranges and SMGs at closer ranges, but does have that healthy balance balance I just mentioned, where you can do well no matter what. And of course, there is human variable applied here too, you know? Sometimes we're capable of performing extraordinarily well, and sometimes some guy will go out with a sniper and just start smoking people at point blank. However, sometimes also somebody will be running around with infantry class and get wrecked by that sniper in close ranges. So we can always kind of screw up and we can always perform well. But generally, you're gonna be playing the way your class encourages you. Not to mention vehicles are in the mix too now as well, and there's much more diversity between them than there was in Battlefield 4. Now we have things like cavalry, and we have things like different variants of land ships and whatnot, and I really, really like this. I like how cavalry gets you across the map faster, and you can act as a dragoon, or you can choose to scope out the Sinai, the larger part of the desert as well, and find those snipers hiding in the sands and just cut them to pieces with the saber, as they can only get one shot off you, then they have to reload and get another two more. So cavalry does really, really well against snipers, however, performs terribly in closer combat with LMGs and SMGs, and it just evolves into this very complex game of rock, paper, scissors with multiple variables applied. So overall, I think Battlefield 1 does that very well, whereas Battlefront has just been this Call of Duty in space that everybody plays relatively the same way. So while they have the same engine and very similar visuals, I do believe that Battlefield 1 is not a clone of Battlefront, but instead something a lot better, something that might maybe, just maybe if EA doesn't screw up with DLC, have the same amount of longevity as Battlefield 4 did, where years after its launch, it still maintains a, maybe not a massive, but a healthy community, which is my goal for this game. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to leave a like, dislike if you did not, and I hope to see you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.